Please welcome to the stage NSC's Chief Strategy Officer, Brooke DeRenzis.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Good afternoon. How's your summit going? Great. I'm Brooke DeRenzis. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer. Is the mic on? Okay. All right, here we go. I'm Brooke DeRenzis. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at National Skills Coalition. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for spending the past day and a half with us and another day with us tomorrow. Over lunch, we're going to have a really great discussion about skills training in the fight for good jobs and an inclusive economy. We want to start our lunch today with a video featuring Kaija Falk, who is pursuing a nursing career while also training other workers for careers in healthcare. And Kaija just graduated last week, as a matter of fact, as a registered nurse. So after the video with Kaija, we're going to take a moment to enjoy the company of the folks at your table, have some lunch, and then I'll begin a conversation with a set of speakers who are working at the intersection of skills training, racial equity, and job quality. So with that, let's hear from Kaija.
Hi, my name is Kaija Falk. I'm 21 years old. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm currently a nursing student, getting my bachelor's in science of nursing at Chamberlain University. And I also work for New Orleans Career Center and also an alumni of the first class at New Orleans Career Center. Originally during enrollment, they came by my sophomore year, which is my 10th grade year. And they talked to us during like an assembly, like you know how in high school you have those little meetings once a week and whatnot. And they told us about the program that they were offering engineering. There were medical trainings and different pathways for that, culinary arts and all those good things. And just asked us what we're interested in. Having this credentialing has allowed me to have a job to support me through nursing school, which is very expensive. Having this opportunity to meet different mentors and different advocates has helped me to get scholarships and grants and things like that to support me throughout this journey. And even to learn about other opportunities that exist that I hadn't heard about growing up. I'm now aware of those opportunities and I can take those to further grow myself and my family. It was important for me because, in all honesty, I come from a single-parent household. So, you know, I watched my mom struggle to make ends meet and to make sure that I was able to get to the next step, and to make sure that she also did the same too. So, you know, it's not too common that in this area you would hear about a program like this or an experience like this where you can graduate from high school and walk directly into a job making sufficient funds and, you know, have certificates and things of that sort to qualify you for those jobs. So, you know, that in itself, you know, was something new. And I just was like, there's no way I'm not going to take the opportunity because those kind of opportunities don't come that often. I think a good job to me is feeling like I'm making an impact. I'm a person that's big on productivity, so I like when I can go to my job knowing that I was productive and I made an impact and made a difference. And most importantly, feeling appreciated and feeling motivated to continue to do their job. You know, feeling like that in a financial standpoint that they're getting, you know, the financial incentives that they should be for the work that they do. I think that all, you know, makes a healthy environment. For now, I am working at New Orleans Career Center. I'm a healthcare support instructor. So I work in a simulation lab where we have actual simulated mannequins that function as humans. So I'm going to be able to help students put those real life skills that we learn in the lecture portion and textbook-based learning into real life practice so that when they go to the hospitals and living centers and clinics, they know how to actually do those skills and they're not foreign to them because they've actually been simulated before and they're able to do that. Also, I've been able to work in the local trauma hospital as a nurse tech, so I've been able to shadow registered nurses and work along registered nurses during active traumas. And I now have opportunity that I will be working in an ICU, taking care of patients that have been going through traumas and whatnot and have chronic diseases and sorts. So this has definitely opened a lot of doors for me to do different things. So I think so far in my journey, my proudest moment would be when I was able to utilize my certificate to be able to help trainees get trained like myself. I wouldn't have imagined that when I first started off, I would be able to take that same training that I once had in high school to give back to high school students while I'm still progressing through my journey. So I think thus far, that has been my proudest moment. New Orleans Career Center is focused in New Orleans, the city of New Orleans itself, but around New Orleans, there are like several different smaller cities, rural areas that too need this kind of assistance. So I think for me, to make this be perfect would just be to actually be able to reach those areas, to continue to expand and help those that are not, right here in New Orleans, but maybe in a neighboring parish like Jefferson or St. Charles. I believe that I would want the policymakers to know that their decisions definitely make a difference. Those decisions that they make definitely fill voids in, different individuals' lives, like myself. Whomever was the creator of this program and of those laws that allowed this programming to be done, changed the pathway of my life. I'm now at this point at 21. My future looks bright. I have the adequate support that I needed to get to this point, and the support that I'll need to continue to grow. And just that, for them to know that it definitely makes a difference. And it's not just a difference for myself, but for my family as well. Because to support me is to also make me stronger enough to support them. And that those laws and those different adjustments can feed and bring in generational wealth to continue to help the future generations of those family members that are getting those assistance. To me, once I graduate and walk the stage, that lets me know that I have finally made it and that life will definitely be different for me and there's no turning back. Generational wealth will occur, personal growth will occur, and quality of life will definitely improve. It means everything to me.
All right, everyone. Feel free to eat. We'll come back in about, 20 minutes or so and get started with our plenary, but we wanted to give you a little bit of time to eat and socialize with each other. So thanks so much.
Please welcome Brooke DeRenzis, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randi Weingarten.
Good afternoon again. So I'm thrilled to kick things off in this conversation with our featured guest, Randi Weingarten, who's the president of the American Federation of Teachers, our AFT. We're going to talk about skills training, the fight for good jobs, and why public investments in education and training matter for us all. After I talk with Randi, then I'm going to continue the conversation with three leaders who are going to bring perspectives from policy and organizing, workforce development practice, and government. Before we get started, let me just give a little bit of background. So AFT is
As
a union.
As you give background, I'm going to pour some water for both of
Great.
us.
Thank you. AFT is a union with 1.7 million members. And coming from a family of public school teachers, I've had an appreciation for the work that AFT has done. But more recently, I learned that AFT doesn't just represent public school teachers. It also includes paraprofessionals and school-related personnel, higher education faculty and staff, nurses and healthcare professionals, local, state, and federal government employees, and early childhood educators, all people and professionals who deliver essential services that impact our daily lives and benefit us all. AFT is working to provide access to good jobs for its members, but it's also fighting to make sure that working people have what they need. And as we're going to talk about with Randi, public education is part of our nation's workforce system, preparing young people for both college and careers. So with that, please join me in welcoming Randi Weingarten to the Skills Summit. So thanks so much for joining us, Randi. I want to start with talking about career and technical education. I know this is an issue you care a great deal about. And we've been talking a lot over the past day and a half about how our economy is changing and technology is reshaping work. And within that context, there's been a real renewed focus on career and technical education. So talk to us about why you think investments in career and technical education are important for creating an inclusive 21st century economy.
In 3 minutes or less, right?
Yes.
So I don't normally do this, but let me just say, I taught in a career tech ed school in the 1990s in New York City. Anybody from New York City here? So you'll know the school, Clara Barton High School for the Health Professions. And in the 1990s, which feels like many, many years ago, we had a huge fight about even keeping these programs. Now, there was the fight at that point was vocational education was viewed as second-class education. And all of the shops were gone, home economics was gone, all of this stuff was gone by then. And some of us really fought for these programs. Why? Because they helped kids think and enjoy school. I mean, our programs help kids go and become, I think, LPNs and dental hygienists. But what I saw in a program and in a school, for those of you who never saw Barton, it was a school for home economics. So you had rooms in that school with windows to figure out how to clean the windows, with kitchens figuring out how to clean the kitchens. I mean, it's an old building. But what it taught me was we need to actually have schooling that helps kids want to be in school. And we kept a few of these programs, but fast forward to now, 30 years from then, career tech ed is the coolest thing alive. The robotics work. I just saw that great interview with that young woman who was becoming a nurse. Yeah. And what you see in terms of graduation rates from high schools is that these qualified CTE programs have 94% of kids graduate from them, and 70% of them go to college. In an era of ChatGPT and AI, if you go into any of these career tech programs, from auto work to other work, to culinary, to graphics. You need to be facile with math and science, application, critical thinking, problem solving. So what we've actually said to the world is let's make career tech ed really a centerpiece for high school, because it is the application of science, the application of math, the application of everything, and it gives kids so many more choices. And I think what has happened, and this, I'm so glad to be here, but all the people who have done workforce development for all these years, what you've created, and all the people who worked on Perkins for all these years, what you've created is enough programs so people can see and touch and feel what are great opportunities for kids learning and being prepared for life, for college, for citizenship, not just for career, so people can touch it. And this is the last thing I'll say, it now then meshes with the huge transformation in our economy, be it CHIPS, be it the Science Act, be it all the climate issues, be it AI. That application of knowledge is so important, and career tech ed pathways really, really, really teach it, and kids have fun.
That's great.
I mean, why are we not doing it everywhere as a result?
Talk to us a little bit more about the importance of partnerships in developing those experiential learning opportunities, those career and tech ed pathways.
So Stan Littell and I wrote an op-ed a few months ago about what we would need to do to scale this work. And we think we need to do three things. Number one is we really do need to nest and start this work in terms of the kids' curiosity and imagination. I would say middle school. Some people would say elementary school, but definitely in high school. But we also need two things that are much harder to do, which is why I think it hasn't been scaled as much as it should be. The second thing is we need employers, small and big, to be able to give kids jobs, internships, externships, and to actually have kids work in a work setting, either by themselves or with others. And the third is we need to have that paid for. Because if we don't, most kids, look, I don't know about any of you, most kids I know who are in high school these days need to work. And if we're creating another opportunity, but they don't get paid, then how are they going to do that and then find the work they need to do for their families? So we need to have that built in. And I think if we did those two things, you'd see a lot more opportunity. But the partnerships, and I just talked to some of the people from New York who do workforce development, we need to develop the muscle, vitiate the line between in school and out of school, and really develop the muscle, all of us, that is about how do we help each and every one of our young people in this pipeline.
Thank you. So I know that you're very passionate about CTE opportunities for K through 12 students, but those of us here are also advocating for skills training for adults, either adults who want to start new careers or adults who want to advance in their careers. And I know that AFT is working to make sure that its own members have training and career advancement opportunities. Talk to us a little bit about what that looks like and why career pathways and advancement opportunities are important to your members.
So we do a lot of, training. I know most of my members would like it to be called professional development as opposed to training. But we are the second largest nurse union and the second largest teachers union. The through line for us is professions that make a difference in the lives of others. I know that's surprising to people, but we basically have, we basically represent the women in professions that help people in the country. Now you can understand why I'm attacked so much. All of us have to keep up with what the world is now. So even if you want to stay as a classroom teacher, as my mother did for 29 and a half years, the world 10 years ago is really different than it is now. The technology is really different. The ways of teaching. And in nursing and healthcare, it's just even more different. So we have to create ways that training doesn't feel like root canal. It has to feel like something that people want to do and where they learn and it feels noble to learn. And so that's why we do a lot of that kind of training, separate and apart from advancement to other professions. But what we also do is we do a lot of training, career pathways from people who are in like school aides and school techs becoming teachers. We do a lot of career pathways to be guidance counselors, to go into what we call the dark side in administration. We do a lot of these kinds of things because we want people to feel their passion and purpose. So we have something, for example, called Share My Lesson, which is free for all of you, anyone. And it has lots and lots and lots of different, not only lessons, but lots of different information for parents, for teachers. And it was hugely important during the pandemic when things were all remote. So we try to do all of this stuff. We do a Teach conference every summer, bringing thousands of teachers back to Washington, D.C. as refresher courses. We do lots of other things. But at the end of the day, what we really focus on is getting people into the profession, because we know if the profession is respected and has agency and has conditions that befit what we are trying to do, including pay, we will have more and more people, as opposed to fewer and fewer people, not only come into the profession, but stay in both of these professions. And I'll end with this. Parents right now understand how important teachers are, but they don't want their kids to be teachers. We need to flip that around. We need to make sure that this profession, which is important to all other professions, becomes one that people really want to go in and stay in.
Well, with that, let's give Randi a huge thank you for joining us at National Skills Coalition. Thank you so much. Thanks again. Let's give Randi one more hand. Thank you so much. So I'm going to invite our panelists to come up on the stage and join us. And as we do that and get set up here, let me set up the rest of the conversation. So at National Skills Coalition, we know that jobs that require skills training are the backbone of our economy. That's why we're all here, right? And we know that working people, as we just heard, play an essential role in our everyday lives and in keeping our everyday lives running and our country running. We think a national commitment to high-quality skills training needs to be part of ensuring good jobs for all and part of ensuring an inclusive economy. And those of us who are here to advocate for public investments in skills training can also be allies in the fight for good jobs. So that's what we're going to talk about in the remainder of our time together as this wonderful panel joins me, and we're going to sit back down. I believe this portion is also going to be live streamed, so hello to everybody who is joining us for the plenary from your computers, and hopefully you will join us here in DC next year when we have the Skills Summit, but glad you are tuning in now. Let me introduce my panelists here. So I have Tameshia Mansfield, who's the Vice President of Workforce and Regional Economies at JFF. I have Angela Hanks, who's the Chief of Programs at Dēmos and an NSC alum. And then I have Abby Snay, who's the Deputy Secretary of Future of Work at California Labor and Workforce Development Agency and also a former NSC board member. So it's great, Abby and Angela, to have you in this conversation as folks who've been part of the NSC team and board, and it's great to have you, Tameshia, as a valued partner. Let's welcome them. So let's just get started. From the perspective of your organization, and I'm just going to go right down the row here, how have you been approaching the issue of skills training and job quality?
Yeah, so hi everybody, welcome. So I think we've been thinking about it in a variety of ways. I think we recognize that advancement in skill training is an important piece and factor as it relates to job quality. It's not the only thing, but it is an important aspect of it. I think a lot of times as we think about job quality, we of course think about compensation, we think about agency and culture, we think about job structure, and oftentimes we don't think about skills and training. But that actually is a key piece of job quality in terms of understanding what the pathways are for people, what the opportunities are for training, what the supports are for people to receive that training. So we do see it as an important aspect of it. As we think about it at JFF, we recognize that a big part of our overall goal is around how do we ensure that people that face systemic barriers actually do have access to high quality jobs, and that's becoming more and more of a key cornerstone and goal of the work that we do going forward, and we can talk about it more.
Great, thanks Tameshia. Angela, what does this look like for your work at Dēmos?
Yeah, so Dēmos is a think tank that works on the economy and democracy and the intersections in between. We aspire to be a think tank for the racial justice movement, so working really closely with grassroots partners and states and at the national level to advance an agenda that promotes an inclusive economy and democracy. I will confess, we don't do a lot of direct work on skills training, but I have some bona fides in this area, both my experience at the National Skills Coalition, but also just recently I was the acting assistant secretary at the Employment and Training Administration at the Department of Labor. But I will say this, advancing an inclusive economy and a democracy, skills training is absolutely a part of it, and the through line for us is really the ability to use training as a lever to build worker power. As we think about how we can use both federal investments and state investments to help workers access the things that Tameshia mentioned, quality jobs that offer quality training, compensation, opportunities for advancement, those are all sort of key inputs to being able to build worker power. And so this is certainly a part of that broader whole, and as we think about our work to build a more inclusive economy, certainly having the ability to access high quality, affordable skills training that comes with all of the services and supports you need, and also it ultimately leads to a good job, ideally a union job at the end, is really critical for building worker power over time.
So I can speak from the entity that is responsible for planning and implementing workforce development and labor policy in the fourth largest economy in the world. And we really approach our work through 4 core strategies. One, and I think I'll echo what my colleagues have said up here and how we really apply some of the core values and principles you both talked about. I mean, the first being a sector focus, which, National Skills Coalition, I think has really brought to the table and to the vocabulary of the workforce ecosystem for a long time. And so what we want to do and try to do is direct training to those sectors that offer good jobs and career career pathways to better jobs. And those are through our high road training partnerships, really led by the Workforce Development Board, industry partnerships that center worker voice, equity, and climate. We're working in partnership with the Health and Human Service Agency on a $1.5 billion healthcare workforce initiative to address the critical shortages in healthcare, increase diversity in healthcare, and build pathways into good jobs. Second really core strategy is an equity lens, just to make sure that we're targeting funding over which we have some control, so that we owe a 15% funding on people who've been marginalized, who've been left out of the mainstream, to really focus programs and services to bring them into good jobs. We have, for example, an open solicitation now, which is new and different certainly in our state and I think around the country, to support services in employment social enterprises, really recognizing that transitional jobs that social enterprise can provide can be a great first step for folks who've been living with homelessness, people who have disabilities who have kept them out of the workforce, and on the assumption that the revenue from social enterprises really can pay for wages, we've wanted to supplement that with funding for support services that can really ensure or support retention and then transition. We're also looking at systems change and innovation. I have been shaping solicitations very intentionally to include community-based organizations or require them as partners and expand eligibility, assuming that, this is right, that CBOs are closest to the communities we most want to bring into the system. And then we just value partnership with other state partners, with philanthropy, with CBOs. One of the biggest surprises to me coming from a nonprofit and joining the state was the depth and breadth of partnership with private philanthropy, and to see how my own skills transferred into building foundation support, to be a partner in systems change work, in an effort that was totally inspired by Randi Weingarten's comments, but we've gotten philanthropic support to convene a working group made of folks on the labor side, through the education side in the state, to create a system for teacher registered apprenticeship in teaching, to really, with the intent of equity, of bringing more teachers of color into the classroom so kids can learn from teachers who look more like them. Complicated, but really promising.
Thanks, Abby. So you're lifting up some of the work that you're doing in the state of California to be really intentional about bringing together skills training, quality jobs with an equity lens, right? And I think one of the questions that I want to ask both Angela and Tameshia is, as we look forward, where do you see opportunities? I mean, Abby's given us some examples of innovation, right? Being very intentional about how to include community-based organizations and solicitations, thinking differently about industry partnerships and sector partnerships with an eye towards equity and job quality, which we'll talk about in a bit, developing apprenticeship in non-traditional fields. So those are some ways that I'm hearing the state of California is thinking about this. I want to hear, Tameshia and Angela, from you as we look forward. Where do you see opportunities to innovate or think differently about how we can intentionally bring skills training together with quality jobs in an effort to advance equity? And Tameshia, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I think part of it, and this kind of stems also from some of the work that Angela was doing at DOL, but I think right now the opportunity, whether it's through DOL or whether it's happening through Commerce with the Good Jobs Challenge, there is actually an imperative now with a lot of the federal dollars that are hitting the street to be able to make sure that those dollars are being used to make sure that people get into good jobs. I think where there is space for both innovation, and I also think what people are telling us they need are additional tools and resources to help them actually define what a quality job is, right? I think I've been in this conversation about the importance of quality jobs for a very long time, and we're in this interesting space where people want to do something and don't have the tools and resources to get there. And so I think where the innovation is around how do we equip education and workforce leaders with the language, with the definitions, with the color, with, to a certain extent, the cover, to do employer engagement with an eye towards job quality. So one of the things that I've often thought about is what would it look like if a workforce board actually held the employers that they engage with in their communities accountable to make sure that those jobs are good jobs. Crazy concept, right? Absolutely crazy concept. But at the end of the day, that system, whether it's the education system or the workforce system, provides the supply that these employers need. So if you're providing the supply, you have an incredible amount of power that is going untapped to hold folks accountable. And part of what we're seeing, and I think what we're seeing with DOL and some of their solicitations, is the recognition that workforce boards need the skills and the cover to do that. So I know recently DOL did a solicitation to do job quality academies. We at JFF will be running those job academies. We'll be making an announcement soon, I think, around the communities that will be doing that to begin providing some of that muscle, some of that orientation, some of that knowledge, some of that initial definition setting that systems need to do to be able to then hold folks accountable. Because right now, job quality, it feels amorphous. I think we all kind of know what it is a little bit, but it's about communities being really intentional about defining what it means for them and in their communities, and then moving and acting from that. So while that's like a piece of innovation, I mean, it's not totally new, but it is a different step that as a system, the workforce system hasn't fully leaned into. And I think the dollars that are out are really pushing that conversation. The leadership that is happening within DOL is also providing that opportunity. So I feel like we have a window in the next 18 months to kind of run with it and see how far we can go and see how deeply we can embed new practices.
Thanks, Tameshia. And for folks who haven't seen it, the Department of Commerce has issued a job quality toolkit that defines key elements of job quality, many of which Tameshia has touched on. And there's an opportunity, we at National Skills Coalition have been engaging with them, but also with all of you as partners to think about how we put those elements into practice. I want to follow up with you, Angela, because Tameshia said something about engaging community to help define what a quality job looks like, right? And we've seen numerous worker surveys that give us a sense of what components of a good job are, but a lot of your work is thinking about engaging communities and giving workers voice and decision making around the policies that impact them. So talk to us a little bit about how that piece fits in.
Yeah, so something that we've been working on at Dēmos for the last couple of years is thinking about this concept of economic democracy. So what does it look like when folks in community actually are able to exercise economic and power over and control over their daily lives? And so we define that sort of in a threefold way. One, by curbing corporate power and advancing countervailing worker power. Two, by expanding public goods. And third, by expanding models of co-governance. So I'll talk about that last piece on co-governance. And I think actually there's a real opportunity right now to see co-governance in action through implementation of these big 4 federal bills that are out there in the world right now. So I think my former colleague Karine talked to many of you about this, I think in the last session, but I'll just do a very quick overview that's definitely worse than what he did. So right now there's these 4 pieces of enacted legislation that exist out in the world. One is a little bit older, the American Rescue Plan Act, which passed at the beginning of the Biden administration, and then 3 that passed last summer, so the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, the CHIPS Act, which focuses on semiconductors, and then the Inflation Reduction Act, which does a number of things, but the biggest investment is $369 billion in climate investments. So across all of these bills, it's somewhere between $3 and $4 trillion. And I was trying to think about, because I think some of the feedback that we've gotten, especially from grassroots partners, as we talk about $3 and $4 trillion, is like that is a meaningless number. It's so big that no one can really comprehend it. So I'll do my best at sort of like social math, which is the Washington Commanders are being bought right now. It's about $1 billion, I think, to buy an NFL team. This is if someone bought 3,000 NFL teams. That is about the amount of money that investments that are going out into the world right now. So it's a lot, and it's I think certainly the biggest federal investment that has happened in my career, probably in my lifetime. And there's a real opportunity here, but it's an opportunity, and it can be everything I think it could be, or it could be a missed opportunity. And so this is where the community engagement really comes in. Across all of these bills, there's a real opportunity to invest in workers and communities. I won't get into sort of all the levers because, again, folks will do that better than me, but there is an opportunity to invest in workforce development, ensure that workers have a free and fair choice to join a union, ensure that folks have access to things like childcare and paid leave, which are essential for many groups of people to get to work. every day. But those things don't happen automatically. There's some kind of broad language in statute, but it really comes down to how federal agencies and ultimately states and localities implement this funding. There are some specific opportunities, like the Department of Energy is requiring community benefits agreements on the investments they're making. More agencies could and should do that, so that's an area to continue to probe. There is millions and millions of dollars going out for workforce development. But I will say, these are big bills. It is confusing, and there's some risk that sort of the sheer enormity of it alongside just how complex it is could create this opportunity, could make this opportunity not work out to all it could be. And so as we are thinking about what implementation could be, the sort of shorthand for those 4 bills, we really are focused on how can communities be at the table as a core partner in how these dollars are spent. Just some examples of how this can work in practice. Dēmos did a series of case studies a couple of years ago examining sort of economic democracy in practice, and it looks like communities organizing around public water campaigns in Pittsburgh, organizing around FEMA funds being spent in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in Texas, the For Us Not Amazon campaign in Northern Virginia. But the through line across all of these things was that communities were organizing and at the table alongside federal and state agencies or local agencies in order to make decisions about how their money was being spent. And there is an opportunity to do that here too, but it does require some on-the-ground collaboration with federal, state, and local agencies in order to make sure that the funds go to the communities most in need. So it's really exciting, but also extremely daunting. Again, trying to figure out how to put 3,000 NFL teams across the country in a pretty short period of time is not nothing. And so I think this is an opportunity to put some of these ideals into practice, but it really comes down to all of us engaging with that funding and thinking about who's at the table, who's making decisions, and what are our ultimate goals. Is it just to give some bad jobs to the same 6 people who got bad jobs in the last round of funding, or is it really to expand the base of workers who get access to quality jobs that offer high wages, that offer benefits, that offer things like childcare and paid leave, that are available to women, to people of color, to marginalized communities who don't often get those good jobs, and as soon as there's a recession, are the first to lose those good jobs when they were available. So that's an opportunity for all of us, and I think something that I feel excited to borderline obsessed over, so looking forward to more.
And I think it's an interesting space for like innovative partnerships, right? Because I think it is a way perhaps for us to think about in the workforce development space to look at community not just as a participant, but as a source of power and action, which is largely not a way that we think about people who live in community in the context of workforce development and education. So it's like an interesting way to re-look at how we look at the folks that live in communities, the folks that walk through the doors of these institutions as a space of power base. But if that is a risk, recognizing that there's a lot of political dynamics in that, but it's an interesting space and an innovative way to think about partnership, both on the ground, but also within us as organizations, because oftentimes economic justice and workforce development organizations are not often on the same panels. Right, and so even being able to have these conversations in this space is also the beginning of that.
Yeah. So I want to stick on this topic of partnerships for a second, right? Because in the workforce development field, and we've heard this throughout the past day and a half here, that industry partnerships and career pathways can be a key strategy for advancing equity and access to quality jobs. But there are a lot of factors that go into making that happen, right? Industry partnerships are intended to give a voice to all stakeholders, both employers, but also workers and organizations that represent workers, training providers, community leaders, and all the ways that we've been talking about. But doing that requires resources, it requires a certain approach, it requires learning and engaging in a different way. And so I want to talk a little bit about what that looks like from each of your spaces and how we truly realize the potential of partnerships, sector-based partnerships to disrupt occupational segregation and to advance equity and pathways to quality jobs. And Abby, I'm going to start with you because California has done this not just at the practice level, but has really done it at the policy level in the state, right, around investing in high road training partnerships and a particular model. Tell us a little bit about that and what that's looked like for you all as a state agency to do that work and support it in communities.
Sure, so the High Road Training Partnerships, and I think many people in this room know my colleague Tim Rainey at the California Workforce Development Board, who really had the driving vision around HRTPs. And tremendous success generating really tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, including some creative approaches of getting those from climate investments, which we're hoping to leverage as some of the new infrastructure dollars come in. But it's a demand-side strategy that works to improve job quality, to drive wages in specific industry sectors, and work at that intersection of equity, job quality, and climate. And I think a great example, just to make this very concrete, is Transit Works, which started in Santa Clara County with the Amalgamated Transit Workers Union, training maintenance staff, bus drivers, in working with electric vehicles, now has expanded around the state. What started 7 years ago with 8 labor management partnerships has now expanded to about 41 different HRTPs around the state. And we've learned a lot, and we're learning a lot. One of the things we're learning with the expansion is how to incorporate worker voice in programs that aren't explicitly run by labor management partnerships. We're also learning how we think a lot and have to think about sustainability. And the California budget flipped. We were looking at incredible surpluses last year. Now we're in a deficit situation. So we have to learn how community colleges can be partners and leaders in HRTPs. The Lumina Foundation is supporting 3 partnerships in the state between the High Road Construction Careers, which are really run in partnership with the building trades, and community colleges in Fresno and the Inland Empire in San Diego. And those have really been parallel systems, not always aligned and working well together. But the High Road Construction Careers, which teach the building trades multi-craft curriculum, are learning how community colleges can offer academic skills, support, and instruction so that people who are participants in the program who need to be able to pass really rigorous apprenticeship exams can get some help in algebra and study skills and test-taking skills so that they can be more successful, and how the community colleges can offer alternative pathways for people coming out of those pre-apprenticeship programs who find that maybe working with their hands isn't what they thought it would be, but they would head towards a certificate in construction management or pre-engineering instead. We're also learning how the restrictions of public funding can preclude some of the services that participants need to be successful. And in partnership with JFF, have developed a pooled philanthropic fund, the High Road Training Fund, which is getting private dollars directly to the organizations running the programs to participants, so that if somebody's car breaks down, there's the $400 to pay for the repair, so somebody doesn't have to drop out of the program. Right? Well, and I think even more importantly than that, we're learning that building successful partnerships takes time and it takes resources. And we've recently changed the funding guidelines so that there's a whole new category of planning grants, just to acknowledge the time it takes to build the industry partnerships, support the avenues for worker voice, build in the right training partners. So $500,000 for a year of planning can lead to then a successful application for a full implementation grant.
Thanks, Abby. So I appreciate the way that the state is thinking about how it both builds the capacity of those partnerships in the way that you talked about, and then also helps sustain them, and how planning and trust among all of those different partners is important to really have the voices of the different partners at the table. I want to turn to you, Tameshia, because you all, as you mentioned, have been are the technical assistance provider for the Good Jobs Challenge. And I know we've talked about the Good Jobs Challenge. We'll have a session on it after this plenary, but it's really one of the major federal investments we've seen in sectoral training and industry-specific approaches. But it's a federal grant that went out to a number of communities, and it's really supposed to have an eye towards equity and quality jobs. So talk to us about what you're learning, on the ground as you all provide technical assistance in that space.
And I'm curious in the room, how many folks are from communities that receive Good Jobs Challenge grants? Just curious. Okay. So some of those folks can tell you a little bit other than me, but I think it's actually been really interesting because I've been talking to the team that is leading this, and I would say there's 3 different things that we're learning from it. One is that grantees are really in different places. And a lot of that has to do with the industries that have been selected for the Good Jobs Challenge. And so we know that for those communities that are doing work in the care economy or in healthcare, they're having a little bit steeper of a hill to climb to get to good jobs and those requirements versus folks who may be doing it in manufacturing. And so there really is a need to create space for collaboration, experimentation, vulnerability, and honesty about I don't know how to do this. And so part of that technical assistance is around bringing folks together for those best practices. So everyone is at a different place depending on how they thought about going about the intentionality of building those sector partnerships, who they have at the table, the level of inclusivity and community voices in that. So folks are really at different places, but they're learning from each other. I would say, and this gets back to what I said before, is that folks are really hungry for tools around, well, how do I know what's a good job? And what we are trying to kind of instill in folks is that this is not about putting the wages into a calculator and then getting an answer to say, yep, that's a good job. But it's really about helping people build that employer engagement muscle, right, in their communities, to begin asking those questions and saying, okay, your job may not be great now, but what can we do to help you get there? And what are the different levers, what are the policy levers that can be pulled? This is a long game. It's a 4-year investment. So what are some other things that can be done to help get the jobs to the better place? So folks really want tools, they want resources, they want spaces for learning, and that's something that we're also finding. And folks are taking, I know in Connecticut, the Quality Jobs Framework that JFF has, some folks are using that to do an assessment of the jobs in their community to then figure out where they are and just defining what they are. And I would say the third piece that we're hearing, and this gets to what you're learning in the fund, is that grantees are really needing supportive services. And they're really struggling to find what are the supportive services that I can access in my community to make sure that the participants that are a part of the challenge actually can persist through training programs that then lead to good jobs. And again, this is some of it is going to be an orientation shift where they're where can I buy these services? And we're well, some of it is that. Some of it may be a contract with a CBO organization. Some of it may be a policy play that you might need to think about. You need better childcare in your state. So not as simple as where can I go buy childcare services, but how are you participating at the table in your local community or in your state around early childhood reform as part of a long game. So we're trying to get folks to think both short term, how do you get the needs met, but then long term, what are the larger plays that you can play? And so the supportive services, I would say, is kind of the third thing that we're learning. But I think that people and states and communities are appreciative of the learning space that's being provided, because this is not just new for the grantees in many ways, it's also new for EDA. So we're also providing technical assistance back to EDA around how do you think about this, how are you defining job quality, how are you thinking about workforce development. So it really is, it is a space for learning, but folks are leaning in and are saying, I have this option to bring in some employers. This employer has a wage and a benefit at this level. Another one is here, and they're doing that assessment many times for the first time, and it feels a little risky. And we're trying to provide the space for people to lean into that risk and then be willing to partner with employers to move them along, to be able to get them to the yes, to have them participate in the challenge.
Thank you, Tameshia. So I know there was a reference to ETA, Angela, and I'm going to stick with that for a minute because we've heard from Abby what this looks like at the state level. We've heard from Tameshia what this looks like at the local level in terms of practice. Given that you've worked on federal policy change and are now advocating around federal policy change, What's one piece of advice? Folks are going to be talking to agencies, they're going to be talking to their members of Congress tomorrow. So what's one piece of advice you would give to federal policymakers? We're like, oh, industry partnerships are interesting. What should we be doing around these, particularly with an eye towards advancing equity and job quality? What should we know about what's happening in places like California and in local communities through the Good Jobs Challenge?
Yes. So this may sound like a cliche ask, but I think it's for money. When I got to the Department of Labor, one of the things that we were really interested in, and actually something that Abby and I talked about relatively early into my tenure, was high road training partnerships, and really the success that had occurred in California with this model over, at that point, I think the last 5 years or so. And so we were really interested in trying to figure out how we could take the federal investments that exist at the Department of Labor to advance a similar model where we're funding and supporting labor management partnerships that are really focused on the sort of twin goals of equity and job quality, which were a core part of what we wanted to do in the administration on workforce development. And it was really hard for a few reasons, but basically we had, Abby mentioned the state of California has been able to put hundreds of millions of dollars of investment into high road training partnerships. And if California is the 4th largest economy in the world, the whole of the United States is probably somewhere in the top 3. And it was really difficult for us to find anything close to the level of investment that California was making in one state alone to support these types of partnerships. There's sort of a big investment in the infrastructure of the public workforce system, which is critical. We need that infrastructure in order to be able to do some of the more innovative things. And there's very little money to be able to support new models and new ideas of how we might reorient the system overall. And high road training partnerships are really, I think, a core and important model. So it's both money, but it's money to be able to do that sort of experimentation and innovation. But it also has to come with accountability. I think something that I would worry about with just sort of like a bunch of money to do workforce and go ahead ETA is, again, the folks who are in there now are really focused on equity and job quality, and it's core to every single thing that the Department of Labor and the Employment and Training Administration does. But that may not always be the case, and we want to make sure that regardless of administration, regardless of who's in the political seats, people can get access to good jobs that pay high wages, that offer childcare, that offer benefits. That shouldn't be a political issue. That should just be how our labor market is structured. And that's something that Congress can help with. So it's money, but it's also money that's really thoughtfully put together in a way that advances those goals around equity and job quality. So we can have long-term programs that don't just run for a year or 2 years, depending on what pot of money we were able to cobble together, but really are about reorienting our labor market toward equity and quality jobs.
And part of that comes with the rules and like this thing called WIO reauthorization.
Right.
Yes.
That would help.
That would help.
Yes. So thinking about, and I'm just going to plug this, National Skills Coalition is going to release a discussion brief next month about WIOA reauthorization and looking at ways we can really invest differently to drive equity and pathways to quality jobs. And there will be a piece on thinking differently about long-term investments in industry partnerships in that way. So we've talked a lot about industry partnerships, and part of the reason we think industry is important and having a sectoral approach is important is because we know that access to quality jobs isn't equitable and that there's variations by industry, right? We know that people of color and women tend to be overrepresented in industries that have lower paying jobs, like healthcare and hospitality, while white men are overrepresented in industries that tend to have higher paying jobs, like manufacturing and construction, and a lot of the jobs that will be created through infrastructure investments. And we know that these differences reflect long-standing history of racism and sexism in our labor market. And so I want to hear a little bit more about strategies you're seeing to disrupt that type of occupational segregation, whether it's industry specific or otherwise. And Tameshia, I want to start with you because you talked about like not, being able to take risks and look at your data and understand what it's telling you about doing things differently. And if you can talk a little bit more about how you're looking at outcomes and data to drive, disruption and doing things differently to drive towards equity, that would be great.
Yeah, so I'll speak a little bit in terms of like how we think about it at JFF, and then I'll give some examples from previous life when I was in philanthropy. But really, I think occupational segregation has often been this like very academic term that we know kind of exists and we know it's out there. And I think what we are finding is that, and one of the things that I say often is that if you want to have an equity play in your workforce development strategy, you have to have a job quality strategy, and you have to look at your data. And you can't get to disrupting something that you can't see and you can't name. And so what that means from our perspective is you have to look at your outcomes data and disaggregate it completely and totally by race, by gender, and even by geography, because then you'll find other things that creep up in your communities. I think Bashara talked about this yesterday in terms of redlining and historical issues in places like Cleveland or Chicago and a lot of places across the country. But what we ask and what we work with, we've done with some workforce boards through our Outcomes for Opportunity work, is we look at them and taking all of the data that they have to report and really like kind of putting it through the paces of really very closely looking at who is walking in the doors and using these public dollars, what are the training programs that they are going to, and where are the jobs that they are going to, and doing like a very like razor focused excising of that data, and then really getting vulnerable with what that data tells you. I don't want to look at my weight when I go to the doctor. I don't want to look at my numbers because then it means I have to change something. The same is true when you start disaggregating your data by race and gender. And systems have to be vulnerable and being able to look at that data and then figuring out and defining strategies to get at and really working on the gaps that the data reveals. So I would say, look at your data, whether that's a workforce system, whether that's a community college program. Look beyond your graduation rates. Look at your enrollment rates and who's in your programs. And then ask, why are mostly women of color going into CNA training programs? Just ask the question. And then kind of begin unpacking solutions from there. So I say part of it starts from data. And I would say the other piece of data, and this is where I'll talk about kind of from an industry perspective, is when I was at the Kellogg Foundation, one of the ways that through talking with Angela when I first started, I was like, help me understand this, and really trying to figure out from an industry perspective, funded the Institute for Women's Policy Research to really look at what are the experiences of women in construction and women in manufacturing, to hear directly from them about the barriers that they are facing to advancement. Right, and there's really rich and interesting data in these occupations that we say are high road and good jobs, but the way that women experience those jobs are very, very different. And so I would say the other piece of data and the other piece of investigation is looking at reports like that are really speaking of the experiences of particular people in particular occupations, because folks, just because people can get into a job doesn't mean that they're going to stay. And you have to look at what are the issues related to agency and culture that are part of a good job that also impact whether or not people stay in jobs. So it is like the whole notion of disrupting in my mind starts with data and investigation, understanding gaps, and then developing solutions based on what that data tells you. Otherwise, all it is a retention strategy to get folks of color in the door, and it kind of stops there.
Abby, it looked like you wanted to build on
Yeah, I'd love to just pick up on what Tameshia said with an example of what we did about a year ago, and I would love to say we've totally changed the situation, but I think addressing a problem always starts with understanding it. And so we looked at earnings differentials for women coming out of the public workforce system, knowing that participants who receive training services tend to do better overall. We've looked at the kinds of referrals to training that was happening throughout the system, and saw that women were being referred to training at the same rate as men. But when we broke down, per your point of and there's just one slide the team did that I love, because it just shows the 10 occupations, the highest 10 occupations men were referred to, and the 10 highest that women were referred to, with a line down the middle of what constitutes, and I think this is underestimating, a living wage for one person in the state at $46,000, and for the referrals for men, 7 out of 10 were over that threshold, and for women, only 1 out of 10 was. So we know that. Addressing that calls for all kinds of systems change, and I think what we don't pay enough attention to when we talk about changing these large public systems is investments in staff development. Because it's ultimately people on the ground who make the referrals, who I think really have to be encouraged to innovate, encouraged not to do business as usual. And then just the other thing to follow up on what you were saying, Tameshia, is I think we also have to listen to our partners and stakeholders when we want to understand the experience of particular demographics in workplaces. So women in construction is a huge priority of our governor, of our legislature, and there's been money allocated to support getting more women into construction. So there's a lot of outreach going on. So women are entering apprenticeships, but they're not sticking. And so when we went out and talked to training providers, talked to apprentices themselves, childcare is a huge barrier. Because to be a construction apprentice, you have to be on a work site at 6 a.m., and it's really hard to get childcare at 6 a.m. So,
Leave is too. So is leave. Leave is too. Like there's a lot of homeless issues.
So we just put out a solicitation and funded, I think, about 20 projects with 75% of the dollars going to actual child care slots. And then we also have to evaluate and really understand the difference that makes. And doing that through trusted partners, through the training entities and community-based organizations that are going to work directly with those women.
Angela, how do you want to build on this conversation?
I'll start with childcare, but I think the two things that I want to talk about are childcare and unions. So on the childcare front, I mentioned those 4 big bills that are making their way through the world right now, and so the CHIPS Act, the Department of Commerce recently announced that they were going to preference companies that applied for the funding that offered childcare to their workers. And that is wonderful, and there was like a little bit of a backlash on doing that. Like, oh, the administration's trying to do too much, it's too many things in one bill. This is really about semiconductors, we're about just addressing the chip shortage, and that should be the thing of it, which I think is like a real indictment on the structure of our labor market. If it's extra for caregivers, largely women, to get these jobs, like that's a bridge too far. we shouldn't go that far. We shouldn't do all that. And so, to Abby and Tameshia's points, childcare is often a huge barrier for one, the availability of it, but two, the really incredible cost. You have to be able to be in a job that's high enough paying in order for you to afford childcare and to make it worth it to your family. And that's something that we haven't been able to solve. The Build Back Better agenda, which was sort of the first iteration of one of these bills that passed, originally included a major investment in childcare, and that was lost throughout the negotiations. And so some of what the Department of Commerce is aiming to do with this CHIPS funding is right or wrong that happened as childcare fell out of that pivotal legislation as it moved forward. So being able to offer things, I mean, childcare is like the cost of college tuition right now, to workers is really essential. It's not an add-on, it is the bare minimum that we could be doing for workers in this country. And if we want these investments to go differently than the investments of the past, we've had major investments as a country, whether it's the New Deal or the development of the interstate highway system, where people of color, where Black people, where women did not get these jobs. We can continue to do that and in 2023 sort of live the same history that we lived in the 1930s and the 1960s, or we could do something differently, and this is really the way to start. And then the second thing I'll say is about unions. So a lot of this funding goes into developing jobs in manufacturing and construction, which is great and needed. And economists tend to talk about the manufacturing wage premium, the reason why manufacturing jobs pay $30 an hour and care jobs pay $12. There's nothing about this, but like the manufacturing wage premium is mostly a result of the fact that those jobs have historically been unionized. It's not that women of color in care jobs can't make $30 an hour, it's that we've made choices about how we want to invest in people in this country, and that's one of the choices that we've made. We've devalued that work. And so as manufacturing workers, as construction workers have been able to come together and organize to build power and demand higher wages, we need to be able to create a labor market where women of color have the same opportunities to do that as well. And that's all about choices. So as we're making these investments, it's exciting to see investments in childcare and promoting of childcare. We still need more money for childcare. It's another way that we get women of color who are working those jobs paid more is by federal investments in childcare across the board. But those two things together can really help move the needle for workers.
Thanks, Angela, and I really appreciate the connections you're making about in order to get more women into construction and manufacturing jobs that we are actively investing in our country, we need childcare, and in order to provide that childcare, we need to be investing in the workers who
Absolutely.
are in the childcare sector.
Absolutely. And we have to talk about the care sector holistically. And it's on the primarily on the shoulders of women to care for aging relatives as well. So we have to look at the whole care economy.
Also unpaid.
Yeah,
Right.
that's right. In ways that affect their lifetime Social Security, retirement savings, time out of the labor market. Right.
So I want to ask one more question that builds on this a bit, and then I want to open it up to you all for questions. You know, you were talking, Angela, about opportunities for folks in the workforce field and in the worker organizing field to kind of come together around these issues. Where do you see opportunities for that collaboration to happen in the fight for good jobs between folks who are skills training practitioners, our advocates, folks who are in worker rights organizations, or in grassroots community organizations? Where do you see those opportunities? Why are they important? We'll start with you, Angela, and then Abby will go to you, and end with you, Tameshia, and then we'll open it up.
So as I mentioned, the implementation stuff is kind of an obsession for me, so I'll go back there. But I think those two entities need each other in this implementation work. There's money for workforce development. There's mostly no guarantee that the jobs created with this funding will be good jobs. That is a task for everyone in this room, for labor organizations, to make sure that these are good jobs. And the way that we do that is through those partnerships with worker organizations, with workforce development agencies and professionals to ensure that as these federal dollars start getting poured into states, into localities, one, that the public officials responsible for dispersing them are held accountable for how they're using those funds, and two, that we have the best creative minds who understand what good jobs are, working to ensure that communities across the board, communities of color, women can benefit from those investments in their communities. So I think it feels kind of like non-optional because I think that this opportunity to really see this unprecedented level of investment in workforce development actually move the needle for communities of color, for people who have been historically marginalized. Those two entities have to come together. So I think it's really pushing for a seat at the table, bringing along worker organizations, labor unions who might not be engaged, who might not understand this funding or have a clear connection to it, community-based organizations, in order to be able to maximize the value of it. But this is, again, there's sort of a framework in place, and federal agencies are kind of putting a little bit more meat on the bones from what Congress authorized, but ultimately this is going to be successful based on how states, how localities are implementing it and working together in order to advance that shared goal of quality jobs.
Yeah, I'll really just echo what you said, Angela, as a call to action for state policymakers and local policymakers. I mean, most of those dollars flow through the states. The power of public procurement has been untapped.
100%.
And there is so much potential. And this is, and the federal infrastructure dollars and these massive federal once-in-a-generation investments are a way of doing that, both in terms of making sure that those dollars go out to create quality jobs through priorities in scoring applications, through making sure that there are community workforce agreements, project labor agreements, and that we could take money off the top of those to create training funds to really, with a priority of getting people from communities who've historically been left behind into those jobs. So I think that's our call. And the other place, and we touched on it a minute ago, is the care sector. I mean, I think this is the place where public, state and local policymakers, workers' representatives, unions representing care workers have to come together to make sure that those jobs become quality jobs. With the aging of the population, with the movement of healthcare out of hospitals into the home, we can't, in the workforce world, keep talking about career pathways and moving people out of those jobs. We need people into those jobs to take care of our families, to take care of ourselves in time, and those have to be good quality jobs.
Thanks, Abby. Tameshia.
And then I would say one of the things that, as we're beginning to think about job quality at JFF, we do say that one of the levers for that is worker-led initiatives and efforts. And so how do you do that? And I think both of you all brought up a really good point. And I would add, because I know there's folks from philanthropy in the room, is that in order to build power at the local level, local organizations need resources to do that. Community organizing entities can't just show up at the table, need the resources to be able to both show up, to learn, to engage. And so this is also, I think, a call for public investment and philanthropic investment in worker organizing to be able to have a seat at the table so that the power can be built from all of the entities that need to be able to move the needle to make the good jobs happen through the 3,000 football teams that are going to be in communities across this country. But it is like an all hands on deck approach. I think a lot of times when we talk about job quality, we only say it's employer action as the only lever to get there, but I think what this conversation has shown is that it's not. It's a policy lever through enforcement, through procurement, through just, I don't know, raise minimum wage and make paid leave and predictable schedules happen. Like there's some policy changes that can happen. But worker-led initiatives are also important. I think industries also have a huge role to play to say what is the bare minimum of a good job to be in this industry and do that work of setting the bar. So it really is like an all hands on deck approach that is necessary to make this happen and make it a reality. Otherwise, all of this money is going to be on the street for naught. And like you said, we're going to just kind of replicate the same inequities, and then we're going to wonder why and what happened.
Thank you. So with that, let's open it up for questions. I think we have folks with microphones. Does anybody have any questions? Okay, I see one in the back here.
I know the light's quite bright.
Thank you so much. My name is Teben. Work for Coastal Enterprises, Inc. in Maine. We are a community financial institution. Thank you so much for the presentation. That was so good. We work on the good jobs, and the thing I would love to see maybe if we can have an understanding of the definition of good jobs, if we can all of us have the same understanding, the consensus on that. Because when we talk about good jobs at CEI, we see the jobs that provide a living wage, paid time off, health benefit, wealth building, scheduling notice, performance reviews, and training, tuition. Is that the same understanding we have? That is one. Second, Tameshia, you said something about holding employers accountable for good jobs. And from the policy perspective, what can be done specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on what aspect of a quality job you're talking about in terms of holding employers accountable. Some of it is around enforcement of just like basic labor laws that go completely unenforced in many communities, particularly for certain industries in this country. Wage theft is a huge issue that occurs, and yet in many states and localities, they don't have enough resources to set up an enforcement and investigation office to make sure that happens. So some of the accountability aspect, I think, can happen through just basic enforcement of the things that employers are supposed to do that often goes unnoticed and under-resourced. So I think that's a piece of it. I think, and I know some of CEI's work and some of other CDFIs, and this isn't really a policy lever, but I think capital and this gets to procurement, I think capital is another kind of lever of accountability that is out there, that when a business comes to get money from a lending institution, and you have certain standards that business has to meet to get those dollars, and then supports to help them get there, that's another really important lever. I think procurement is huge. I think there are a lot of publicly funded jobs that could be better jobs. I think the care jobs are a really good example. A lot of long-term care jobs are funded with Medicaid dollars, and yet there is no mechanism of enforcement or enough money in the Medicaid system to make sure those jobs are good jobs. So I think there's a lot of different mechanisms for accountability, and it just depends on the sector, on what aspect of a good job you're trying to enforce. And then kind of based on those decisions is kind of where you decide what the policy levers are. But it starts with your definition, and it starts with the industry.
And we probably have to think more sector by sector rather than employer by employer.
Exactly, yeah.
And the other thing I would say is that the workforce system has a requirement that if someone comes in for services, the workforce system serves them, right? That same requirement does not exist for all employers, and I think for good reason. There's an opportunity to make choices about what types of employers can get access to our public money in order to build their workforce. So employers that are engaging in wage theft, employers that are paying extremely low wages, employers that are making their workers sick or unsafe on the job, are not entitled to the resources that agencies provide. And so I think having some standards, it's not a policy lever, but I do think there are some workforce boards across the country that are rethinking how they engage with employers and what standards they set for who can come into their door on the employer side and get access to their services.
Exactly.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. Are there any other questions? Okay.
Thank you for the great presentation. My name is Zeman Sao. I'm from Salt Lake City, Utah. I'm just wondering if you have any advice on how to do this work in a conservative environment where equity is something that we are not allowed to say, and there is this denial that there is no one being left behind. Any promising best practices that you have seen?
Because we are nonpartisan, we have to have solutions on both sides, right? I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that that is an easy nut to crack, because it's not at all. I think some of what we've seen and what we've heard, and this gets to how do you identify and cultivate employer champions? And I think it's about how do you identify the coalition of the willing that are already doing good work, that are providing good jobs in your community. Just because it's a conservative environment doesn't mean that all the employers are offering not great jobs, right? So I think a piece of it is how do you find those employers in your local community that are doing the right thing and giving them the space to talk about the impact of what doing the right thing has meant to their bottom line, to their recruitment and retention efforts. And I think that's a piece of it. I think the other piece of it, and I'm gonna channel my aunt, who is in Detroit, and she made a really good point at the Mackinac Policy Conference in Michigan, which is somewhat conservative space. But one of the things that she said there is that employers in a community know who's right, who's doing good, and who's not doing good, right? And so the ones who are doing good have the opportunity to utilize their civic power that they have to help do some of that accountability and that checking. Is it easy? Not at all. But I think in the right climate, where in a conservative environment, political environment that listens to business leaders, it's about getting those business leaders to talk to the people who will listen to them about what needs to be done to make a good job happen, and take some of the fear and the politics out of what a good job is. Because having a good job should not be a political statement. It shouldn't be. It should be like the basis of what our economy is about. And I think employers have a huge like kind of civic responsibility when they are doing it well. And I think a lot of political leaders also listen to small and mid-sized businesses in their communities. They listen to large corporate actors, but they also listen to small and mid-sized businesses because those are their voters often as well.
And just to amplify Angela's comments of a few minutes ago, we in the public workforce system can be selective about which employers we want to support. So we should use those levers.
And I will just amplify something Tameshia pointed to earlier, is like looking at our data and understanding where we need to go to meet shared goals in community around employment, earnings, thriving communities and economies. We heard this theme throughout our conversations over the past few days, but looking at data and outcomes matters for understanding whether we're meeting our goals, regardless of the context. So with that, we're at time. I have a few housekeeping announcements, but before I get there, let's give a huge hand to the panel. Thank you so much, Angela and Abby and Tameshia, for joining us. So we're going to go into a break, but then after the break, take time to network, use your app, make some meetings with folks through the chat function in the app and the meeting function in the app, and then after that, please be sure to join one of the 2 concurrent sessions that we have following this. The concurrent sessions are great. They start at 2:30. One is going to be focusing on sector partnerships and the Good Jobs Challenge, what we're learning from that, particularly with an eye towards equity. And so there's an opportunity to continue that conversation. And then another one is going to be talking about, like, just as we think about what quality jobs look like, what do quality credentials and quality training programs look like, and how are we doing our work in the workforce space to be thinking about quality in terms of the programs and policies we're delivering. So be sure to tune into one of those. And then we'll be coming back here after the concurrent sessions to do some prep work with our amazing government affairs team about how to take everything we've talked about over the past day and a half and bring that into our conversations with federal policymakers. So make sure to come back here after your concurrent sessions, meet with your state delegations, and get prepared to have your voices make a difference, because as we've heard, you all are the experts in this space. The final announcement I have from a housekeeping perspective is that we want to hear from all of you how you've enjoyed the summit, or what we could do differently, what we did well, and so we're going to be releasing a post-event survey or evaluation on the app that will be available tomorrow afternoon. If you haven't downloaded the app, make sure you do that, because we need your feedback. We appreciate the time you've taken to be here, and we want to make sure that we're using it. So with that, thank you so much.